Hello, I'm the Rubber Von Ducker, and today I'm going to be discussing how the finances of your club in combination with COVID may limit your ability to function in the transfer market this season. I'm first going to go over the effects effectively that COVID is going to have had on the football clubs and on the transfer market itself to some degree. Going to be using the Financial Football News website in order to make my argument. I will just be using the summary details, so do be aware there is full articles here, so if you are interested in looking further into your club's finances, it's definitely worth a look. They seem to have done some very good work. Unfortunately, it does seem to have stopped currently, but then equally football clubs haven't been reporting their accounts on time, and so that, I believe, may be a factor, as might be the fact that they may be in a situation where they can't currently post. So I'm effectively going to go through all the clubs at the end. So at the end, all the clubs will be in alphabetical order, little badge at the front, and then under 2 minutes or around 2 minutes talk about your possibility of signings and your finances. So if you want to skip to your specific club, just look for the badge. If you see a badge of a club that's alphabetically after you, you've gone too far, pop back. Equally though, I would say it's worth looking at all of them because you can kind of get a strategic idea of where each club in the Premiership is financially, and that might explain or give you some idea as to why your club may be playing hardball with them, or maybe more willing to rush in and pay the amount up front. Obviously, if you don't have to sell, you're in a better position to demand a higher price. Now, let's look at the effects of COVID, the main one being the loss of income. Gate receipts are going to be down as long as fans are allowed to return to the terraces. Obviously, if they're not allowed to return to terraces, then there'll be no gate receipts, which means that those with the biggest attendance and gate receipt revenue are going to be the big losers there. So in a way, it actually affects the bigger clubs worse. The commercial income will also be impacted quite heavily. With no fans, there's no one to buy burgers or drinks or programs or merchandising. So all of that's going to come into the commercial figures. On top of that, though, there is also advertising revenue, and here is a slightly different scenario. There is a total pool for advertising revenue within the Premiership, and if some companies fail or have to cut back on their advertising revenue, that means that the price of advertising is going to go down, and so there's going to be competition and movement of sponsors, presumably. So, for instance, the big clubs such as Manchester United, Liverpool, and the others who are in Europe, they will probably benefit a bit there because if they do have a gap in their advertising, they can offer it to another sponsor who may be sponsoring another club and poach them away. Obviously, that would still mean they'll have a reduction in their overall revenue, but they'll be able to fill all the boards and fill all the sponsor positions they have. Other clubs may not be that lucky. Equally, with the advertising revenue, you have the sponsors as well. And I think unlikely in the Premiership we're going to see any major issues there, but there is a chance for some clubs for their sponsors to cease trading or cease being able to fulfill the contract financially, and so they may lose sponsors, be it shirt sponsors or secondary sponsors. There is also, with the commercial side of things, a digital signature for most clubs. So this season may be a real test of who's invested best in that infrastructure. I suspect, again, big clubs like Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, who I believe already have reasonably sized own channels, may benefit. Obviously, they may be a greater focus on digital services in the coming year. That can't really be taken into account very heavily in the budget until they see what the results are. Obviously, they've already got a previous revenue from that can be included, but if they're looking to push out onto a digital platform more, then there's going to be certain costs involved in developing new services, and obviously the income streams at this point are unknown, so it would be hard to judge how much that's going to bring in. As well as that, there is also the question of, even if you can somehow connect financially with the fans, how much do the fans currently have available to spend? Obviously, a lot of people have lost their jobs, more probably to go. It's going to affect, obviously, different regions in different ways, so it's really hard to say. But obviously, if fans aren't going, if fans are earning revenue, earning wages, not going to the match, then they should theoretically have a bit of spare cash, which they would have spent on a ticket, to spend on something else. So possibly the digital subscription kind of model might be a way to go. Obviously, some clubs have hotels as well, and they'll be obviously losing revenue. So all these things together are going to see the clubs effectively relying on the TV money. That's the most stable income they have, and that's what's going to sustain them. I think that's where, unfortunately, the European clubs aren't as lucky, because the money there is of a lesser value and not as evenly distributed. Same is true for the Championship. You'd have to see my other video, Champageddon, on that one. I think those are the main overall effects on the club, which are quite significant in themselves. There will also, I believe, be a push on wages this transfer window, so you may see more transfers fail because players aren't willing to take the wage cut, or the clubs can't afford the wages. Now, on top of that, I guess the final effect of COVID on the transfer window is that we're in a season that doesn't end. We've still got Champions League football, we've still got Europa League football. Those are both to end, but Scottish football's already kicked off. So it looks like we're just going to have rolling football until at some point we've caught up. That makes it difficult to organise player purchases, because obviously if you're looking at buying from a club that's still in European competition, they're not really in the biggest rush to discuss it with you till they've dealt with European competition. Now, I think it's going to take a while for clubs to realise how the situation is overall, and it's going to be interesting to see what their response is when they realise that. I dare say some already have, and I think some agents beginning to realise it, and I think we'll see agents. You'll see players linked with just about every club, and I hope that they hit one that's got the finances to pull off a transfer. So I think it's going to be a very buyer's market. It's going to be a buyer's market, I think, this season. In the European transfer market, that's also going to be a bit suppressed. The reason being, Spain and Italy obviously quite heavily hit with COVID as well. You've got the main two clubs in Spain having massive gate receipts from big stadiums. That's just going to be wiped out, along with a load of commercial revenue. So the question there at both Real Madrid and Barcelona is, have you got the money coming in to cover the bills? And that is a question that's, I think the answer might be no. So they're looking at putting on a debt, which is going to limit their ability to buy. They want to sell. Real Madrid wants to get rid of Gareth Bale. He's not going anywhere. Hazard hasn't been performing. Maybe they'd want to get rid of him. Again, I don't really see him going anywhere. Same for most of the players they've bought that they feel don't achieve the standard needed. Barcelona want to get rid of Coutinho. They might do, because he was the best Barcelona player on the pitch the other day against Bayern. Maybe Bayern might buy him now. I think they've already written a price into the agreement, so it's a cut price deal, so maybe they'll go for that. But I can't see them coming in and buying many players from Barcelona or Real Madrid. I think they're more going to be looking out for youth players. So we might see Barca and Real being forced to sell youth players that they wouldn't want to get rid of. It's going to put them in a very tight situation. Obviously Germany has money, so they can spend, most of that coming from Chelsea. Obviously though, they've got other income sources, and so I think Germany's one of the few that can afford to spend, although I think they'll perceive a weak transfer market in Europe and take advantage. Italy, I don't see them. Again, they've got a number of clubs with high attendances, high gate receipts, and so again, less dependent on TV, and the TV payments are going to be considerably less than the Premiership, who I believe are best in the world. Are they going to have the money to be able to cover their squad? Probably, but it doesn't put them in a great position to buy either. And then there's China, which there's a political issues with China. There's the economic issues now with China, with this kind of global shutdown. And then there's issues of flooding, issues of drought, a couple of earthquakes. So I think China aren't really going to make a lot of noise in the transfer market. You can't rule it out, because there are a number of owners over there who I think have probably got crazy cash in their bank accounts, so why not? But I think overall, I think it is going to be a very quiet period from China. I think the political situation is more of a factor. I think it's going to be less call on Western footballers and a more push on internal development. I guess maybe South America and America might be willing to buy players. So I know Manchester United fans are talking about a mass clear out. I think you're going to be lucky, but maybe the coming of Miami Galaxy, or whatever Mr. Beckham's club is called, maybe that might make a difference. Maybe you can get some players to go over there. I think though you're going to struggle to sell them to other Premiership clubs because of the wages and because of the budgets. And I don't see massive appetite from Europe for them. Generally, the kind of players you're offering aren't the kind of players that German clubs want to buy, not unless they're cheap. So that's the challenges the clubs are facing. Let's move on and look at the individual clubs. Arsenal 2019 financial results: revenue 396 million, wages 235 million, so a nice surplus there of roughly about 160 million. You did have a net spend of 65 million, but there is still 100 million effectively left over. We've got a breakdown of revenue of matchday 96 million, broadcasting 183 million, and commercial 111 million, with other of 6 million. Now the matchday revenue is at the moment going to be wiped out with no fans allowed in the stadium. Obviously with social distancing they should get some revenue back, and that will also affect the commercial figure, as I've said previously. So I think matchday, effectively they'll be working on a zero figure for the year until they know what's happening with the fans. And the commercial figure, the commercial figure will be written down. The question is how much. I think 50% as a worst case scenario for Arsenal. It will fluctuate from club to club, I suspect. But yeah, I think a 50% hit on the commercial revenue is not unreasonable. Now that is going to leave the club in a situation where broadcasting and commercial revenue does cover the wages for the coming year, and that's good as long as the broadcasting revenue stays at that level. Obviously, in this season, you're Europa League runners-up, and so that broadcasting does include European competition. Obviously, you're not going to get that much for the Premier League, finishing, I believe, in 8th. So you're probably looking at 130 to 140 million there. Even then, you should have enough to survive. Net debt's low. Obviously, you've got debt of 209 million, but you've got cash of 167 million, so debt's only 42 million. The fact that you've got cash means you can spend if you wish to. However, I think with a lack of European competition and the revenue that comes from it, it will be a conservative period. I know Arsenal fans do want a rebuild of the team to some degree. I think that may have to wait, although I would expect a number of signings from Arsenal, but I'd be surprised if it's more than 3. Aston Villa 2019 financial results. We've got revenue of 54 million, wages of 95 million, with a breakdown of 13 million for the match day, 22 million for the broadcasting, 19 million for the commercial. These are obviously the final year in the Championship, so before we came into the Premiership. We've got player sales in 17 million, out 14 million, net spend of 3 million, and the club has debt of 0.3 million, cash of 21.9 million, so a net cash 21.6 million. The interesting thing about the wages is that would include the loanees, and obviously I think we had 5 loan players including Tammy Abrahams at that point, so it explains why the wages went up in a season where we were quite close to bankruptcy, so spending was limited greatly. Obviously, hard to actually show anything that relates to this year because there has been a massive change. 9 players left, including Micah Richards, who was on Premiership money. I think as well as that, we'll have the broadcasting of over 100 million. And we'll have the same again for the coming year. So we'll have money to spend, especially as we have no real debt at this time. How our owners have done that, I don't know. So yeah, hard to really compare this with the current situation because things are so fluid at Aston Villa. I'm hoping to see that wage bill probably reduce in the next financial results, which would cover the last year, the Premiership. I don't know if they'll come down radically, and hopefully we won't be getting up to that level of 95 million that quickly. So I'm hoping we'll have a bit of wiggle room for a couple of years yet. But yeah, I expect Aston Villa to be buying players, not as heavily as we did last season, but maybe 2 or 3, depending on whether Grealish goes. If obviously Grealish leaves, then we'll have to look at replacing him, and that could be expensive because there aren't many options out there. For those who've watched my other video, Champageddon, that is obviously a terrible state of affairs and illustrates the excesses that some owners can go to. I believe the debt was higher before our new owners. But yeah, that wage salary of 73 million was ridiculous, really, for the previous season. Obviously 95 million is ridiculous for that season, but I can't really blame the owners for that because they'd not had much time to adjust the situation. But I mean, when we were spending, I think it was about 75,000 a week on John Terry in the Championship, that was just ludicrous. And that was the season when it was a £73 million wage bill. Luckily for us, we made it to the Premiership. Otherwise, I think we'd be struggling to get back there for a few years until the situation was resolved. Brighton & Hove Albion 2019. We've got revenue of 143 million with wages of 102, so a surplus there of roughly 41 million. We've got a net spend of 68 million on players, with 14 players brought in, and you've got matchday income of 19 million, broadcasting of 114, and 10 million commercial with 2 million other. Obviously 114 for the broadcasting revenue will cover the wages, although it doesn't leave a lot left over. Debt is at 280 million, which seems relatively high. I don't know if you've had major changes to your stadium. I haven't heard anything, but that does seem a very high debt for a club at your level. Obviously, if you're a European club, or not a European club, if you're playing in European competition, that would be a more manageable debt size, but it seems a bit big. I would have thought 100 million really should be the top debt, unless you bought a stadium, unless there's some reason for that growth in debt. I'll put it down to a stadium. You guys know, you the fans know, whether that's the case or not. If not, I would be a little bit concerned by that. Obviously though, they're not really in a position to buy. I mean, they can't even borrow to buy if they wish to do so. Very tight situation at Brighton. I think you're effectively looking at keeping the team you've got going forward. You may even see the management want to sell a player or two to bring their wage levels down. Until they know what's happening with the match day revenue and the commercial revenue, I think there is going to be a little bit of conservative mentality at Brighton. I think that's going to translate into a very quiet summer transfer window. Could be wrong, but the figures there seem to suggest to me you're not spending big. So if you do bring someone in, maybe on a loan, but I think realistically, unless you're selling, I don't see you buying. Burnley 2019, revenue 138 million, wages 87 million, so a good almost 50 million revenue spare effectively. But obviously that depends on your matchday income and your commercial income. So your matchday income is 8.9 million, your commercial income is 14 million. If you do lose all of that, you're only losing what, 23 million, 24 million roughly. So you've still actually got room to spend under this scenario. You've also got no debt at the time, 2019, plenty of cash. So it does look good. The only thing I would say is, again, Europa League playoffs. So yeah, you've got probably increased broadcasting and matchday revenue. In fact, probably in all areas. And to be honest, I think it probably means you didn't get that much from being in the Europa League. And with the increases in the current TV rights with the Premier League, you're probably getting the same money again, if not more, just from the Premier League rights. So it's a relatively rosy picture at Burnley. It's looking like one of the best small clubs out there. I say small, they're not small, but non-Europa League regulars who seem to be running the team pretty well financially. It's one of the better results from a non-top six, and hopefully that will remain. Yep, they can afford to spend on a few players. Maybe they're the people to take advantage of what I think will be a difficult situation elsewhere. But yep, pretty good. So this is the results for Chelsea 2019. We've got revenue of 452 million, wages 288 million. On the surface that looks great. Unfortunately, when we look into it a bit further, maybe it's not as great as one would like. Let's look at the income breakdown. You've got 67 million on match day, 200 million in broadcasting, and 185 million in commercial. So if you lose a large proportion of all of these, you're effectively running on a 200 million. That did include you being Europa League winners, so there is a bit of a payday there in that. However, we do know you're in the Champions League this year, you will be next year. That should hopefully boost your broadcasting again to a similar figure. With regards to transfers, there are a lot of ins, very little outs. Obviously, that's also due to the fact that you knew you were going to be under a transfer embargo, so brought players in. It would be interesting to see the 2020 results when they come out. The big problem that I have with your club's finances really is the debt. The debt is huge. If you consider it's 1.3 billion. And when you consider the Glaziers had a massive revolt over leveraging the club for 800 million, well, you can't be too happy about that. But obviously it's been a year, it's been a big year for you, you've been unable to purchase, you've had some sales and hazard obviously going. That's probably reduced the wage bill considerably. I'd hope you've got room to manoeuvre, and judging by the fact that you've signed Timo Werner and Havertz already, looks like you have. Obviously we won't know for sure until we see the figures for 2020, which I believe could be due in October. So, but on the face of it, it looks relatively okay in the short term. It's a long-term picture that worries me with Chelsea. Crystal Palace 2019 results. We've got revenue 155 million, wages 119 million, so a good gap there of about 35-36 million. With the income breakdown, match day 11 million, broadcasting 124 million, and commercial 18 million. Now obviously again, if you lose both the match day and the commercial revenue, then you've only got 124 million to work with, but you are still within your wage limit, so it's sustainable. Obviously as well, in 2019 you had Wan-Bissaka, who left for a large sum of money, so I would presume that this figure, your debt may even be back to zero, technically. So the figures don't look so bad long term. In the short term, it doesn't look like you've got a lot of room to manoeuvre unless players go. Obviously, Benteke is a big wage earner, not delivering, probably not going anywhere, so you may have to wait for him to end contract. There is also Zaha, who's on the last year of his contract. The question is, would he sign a new one? Does he want to move away? I think this would possibly be a bad time for him to move away. It would be a good time for you to sell him. The question is, who will pay reasonable money for him at this point? I think a lot of people might be looking at that and thinking, I'd rather wait till he's a free agent and then take the chance then. Obviously though, if you manage to get him to sign a new contract, the only way really to do that is to pay more wages, and can you afford to do that? So it's a difficult situation. I think you're going to be limited in spending depending on sales. Everton 2019 revenue 188 million, wages 160 million, so a surplus of 28 million on the surface. We've got the income breakdown. Match day is equal to 14 million, broadcasting 133 million, and commercial 41 million. Now obviously if these get decimated, then you've only got 133 million to pay the wages. Obviously I think commercial was 5 better than match day, but I think you're going to see most of a match day wiped out, most of a commercial, so you may possibly be in deficit for this season. Now if that's the case, that's going to make it difficult to purchase any players. I think realistically Everton is looking at a situation where they're going to have to sell before they can buy, if they wish to buy. Debt situation's not terrible. They're about 9 million in debt. Yeah, 9 million in debt. Again, this is based on a relatively good performance. Well, maybe not in the cups, but a relatively good performance in the Premier League. Obviously, they had a slightly worse season this season. That said, broadcasting revenue's up, so that should make up the difference. But again, not a season where I see Everton spending heavily in their transfer market, not without saying. Fulham 2019, we've got revenue of 138 million, wages of 93 million. This is a season where they came up to the Premier League. Obviously they had a bit of wiggle room there. Got probably 45 or so million surplus. Matchday revenue 11 million, commercial 18, so for a 29 million there. They can survive paying the wages on broadcasting fees, and obviously this will be up from 2019. Net debt nice and low, cash in the bank. Obviously this would have been, well, they had 10 players in, so this would have been after they bought the players, but before they got relegated. Obviously they've had parachute payments for 1 year, they've come back up, so it's not unreasonable that that we're getting a higher figure than this from broadcasting, so I think they can sustain that wage bill. Equally, some players went out on loan. I think a couple may have been sold, but I can see room for them to spend, maybe not big, maybe 3 or 4 players. Obviously that does change if they have outgoings. The players on loan may have clauses whereby they can be purchased. We'll have to wait and see. Equally, they may get offers for players that are on the fringes of their team, so there's room for them to manoeuvre. Maybe not as much room this year as there was in 2019. Leeds United 2019 financial results, and we've got revenue of 49 million, wages of 46, so £3 million surplus. Obviously a few transfers, so 10 million in, 6.6 million, 3.7 net spend. Matchday income 18 million, broadcast 9.1 million, commercial 21 million. Obviously they've been promoted, so they're going to see this figure shoot up to 100 million. They have got plenty of room to spend. Net debt 35 million, cash 0.5, and of course this is in the 2019 season, so depends on the state of affairs last season. I can't remember them being mentioned with many money moves. Obviously if they've reduced the wage bill or they've sold a few players, that will make a little bit of difference, but realistically good 50 million surplus just on the broadcast rights, and obviously they should get some matchday and commercial income. Obviously probably greater commercial than matchday until people are allowed to go back to the stadiums. So plenty of room to spend. I would expect them to moving big in the transfer window. Leicester City 2019 financial results. Revenue 178 million, wages 150 million, so roughly 28 million surplus. Matchday 15 million, commercial 33 million, with broadcasting coming at 128 million and 3 million other. Obviously with just broadcasting rights alone, the wages aren't covered. Got a relatively big commercial number there, so hopefully that will cover the difference. This is all, of course, 2019, so if you've had some major sales or purchases, that may be a factor. I believe during this period they sold Harry Maguire, I believe, for roughly 80 million, so hopefully they have, because that would reduce down the debt to a nice, well, net zero figure. I think you might even have 1 million after debt. Obviously if these figures include him and there is 103 million for 7 players, then that could be an issue, but I think realistically it probably doesn't. Obviously had a good season this season, so broadcasting rights will be up. Don't know if they'll quite be up to the 150 million, but with European football I believe achieved, then hopefully that will make up the difference for you. I can see you, if European football does make up those figures, as I suspect it does, I could see you buying 1 or 2 players, but I wouldn't expect, again, a heavy inflow of players, not without an outflow. Liverpool 2019 reports. Revenue 533 million, wages 310, good 220 million surplus. Transfers in 164 million on 4 players, out 37 million on 6 players. So they spent 127 million on players, still leaves them over 100 million available. They've got match day income of 84 million, broadcasting income of 261 million, and commercial of 188 million. Huge numbers, obviously. It's a season they won the Champions League. Broadcasting figures will probably be down a bit for this year as they didn't make it to the final. Obviously next year they'll be in it again, having won the premiership, and I dare say their broadcasting will have the benefit of the winning the premiership. The commercial figure, with it being a big European club, may survive better than most. Obviously people want to have a long-term partnership with teams like Liverpool, Manchester United, ones with long histories of winning. You can also add Chelsea and Man City to that, although they don't quite have the same pedigree. I think both Liverpool and Manchester may command a slight premium. I mean, Manchester United most certainly does, and I think you can say the same for Liverpool, more so than any other club within the league. Plenty of room for them to manoeuvre. Sales in and out. Obviously sales out might be a problem with European clubs probably more badly affected than the Premier based on the TV rights. Obviously net debt of 195 million, cash of 38 million, relatively high, but considering the revenue streams, considering the club, more than livable. Definitely a lot better than Chelsea and Manchester United. I think they're going to go on and have another good season. I don't think they really need to spend, but they can if they wish. I think it's a case that they just need to maybe add a bit more depth to the squad, or maybe bring in some youth to replace those who will be outgoing in the next 5 years. But very good position for Liverpool. I expect more of the same next season. Manchester City 2019 results: revenue 535 million, wages 315 million, so again a good 200 million surplus. Transfers in 71 million, out 49 million, net spend of 22 million, so not a massive spend, but pulling something from your debt pile. Match day income was 55 million, broadcasting revenue 253 million. You won the Premier League, and I think you made the Champions League quarter-final, and FA Cup winners and League Cup winners. So 253 million though doesn't cover the total wages. That said, you've got a commercial figure of 227 million. It's got to be what, 75%. If you lose 75% of that, you might be a bit troubled. I don't think that's realistic. I think that amount of money, or probably going to lose 50%, so you should be able to cover your wage budget. You're still in the Champions League at this time in 2020, so if you win it, you could get these figures to go, or this figure to go higher, which would definitely help you with the following season. Again, those Manchester City, I don't see them buying a lot of big players. They bought Nathan Ake for 40 million. Maybe there's another couple of key players they want, but I don't see them spending that big at the moment. I think they're going to play a wise game and see what's available cheap this season, and make a judgment call as to whether it will improve the squad. I would expect them to be free to spend a bit if they wish. Same as Manchester United 2019 results. Revenue 627 million. I believe that's the biggest revenue of any club, hardly shocking. Wages 332 million, effectively just short of 300 million surplus. In 74 million on free players, out 28 million in free players, net spend 47 million. Matchday revenue, the largest I think we've seen, 111 million. Broadcasting 241 million, which is just 10 million short of Manchester City. And they won the league, and they only came 6th for Manchester United. Commercial revenue 275 million, As with Liverpool, I think the commercial revenue won't be as devastated as for other clubs. Matchday revenue is obviously going to be devastated the most. Broadcasting 241 doesn't quite cover the wages of 332, but if they get 50% of their commercial revenue, that should cover the shortfall. Net debt 511 million, down from the 800 million when the Glazers bought the club back in about 2004, 2005. Cash 308 million. This is 2019. Obviously, they spent on a couple of players like Wan-Bissaka and Harry Maguire. Net debt 204 million. That's probably gone up because some of his cash has been spent. Obviously, they were currently connected with Sancho, bought to Dortmund. Don't know if that's going to go ahead, but 100 million is not. I suspect that's not going to leave much room for other players. It might explain why they've gone a bit quiet on Grealish, because maybe if they buy Sancho, they can't really afford Grealish. Not now that Villa have stayed up. Maybe they felt they could have got him cheaper if we'd gone down, and that probably would be true. So yeah, I think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is going to get a couple of transfers. I don't think he's going to get a lot of transfers. I think the board's going to be cautious, especially given the loss of revenue they're going to see initially. I think that he's going to get a couple of players. I just don't think he's going to get the 3 or 4 that he probably wants. It probably will be 1 or 2. Newcastle United 2019 finances. And before I show them, I'm going to say that this is one of the few times that having the owner that you do has actually benefited you. Mike Ashley, through arguably not investing heavily enough in the squad, has actually put you in a relatively good position this transfer window. So the 2019 results show that your revenue for the year was 176 million, but your wages were 97 million. So that means you've got a 79 million surplus. Now, I've got to confess, when I first thought who would be the biggest club to take a hit, it was yourselves. The reason being is you don't have European football, yet you have a very big ground, which means you have very good match day income, or at least I presume you do. And because of that, your wages may have been in excess of the broadcasting. But no, you're still well within your broadcasting earnings, 124 million against 97 in wages. So plenty of room to expand if needed. Obviously, match day and commercial revenue are expected to be cut. You're still going to get some commercial revenue, so 130, 140 million for the year may not be out of reasonable approach. You've got debt of 112 million with cash of 14 million, so net debt of 98. It's not terrible, it's not great, but it's not terrible. I think there is room for purchases. The problem being, though, is the same owner who's put you in this wonderful situation may not want to go forth and expand the wage bill. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's conservative about purchases. Obviously, you've had a couple come in. You're also probably going to have a few go out on free transfers, so no income really coming in, but a reduction in the wage bill. I think you could spend, I think you will spend, but I think we're talking 1 or 2 players. And I don't see it being a big transfer window for you, I'm afraid. If the owners change, then it could be a massive window for you. But I think if Mike Ashley stays in control, you're probably looking at a conservative transfer window just to hedge his bets. Might be the wisest thing to do at this time. Not what Newcastle fans necessarily want to hear. Sheffield United 2019 results. Revenue 23 million, wages 41 million, again back in the Championship, so that's a deficit of about 18 million. They did have 6 million income from 2 sales, outgoing 11.2 million on 2 players, net income of 5.2 million. They had match day income of 6.5 million, broadcasting 12 million, and commercial 3 million. Obviously they're in the Premiership now. This is up to 100 million plus. Net day at 3.4 million. That probably doesn't exist anymore. Had a wonderful first season back in the Premiership. Got another season to go. Didn't buy heavily on players, so probably still keeping relatively low wage to TV advertising revenue. I expect Sheffield to add 3 or 4 players, or realistically up to 3 or 4 players. Question is whether they'll want that many. I think they're quite happy relatively with the performance of the squad, so whether they want to bring in more players and possibly disrupt that, I don't know. They may again be cautious and keep cash in reserve. I think though realistically you can expect at least 1 or 2 signings from Sheffield, possibly relatively big signings, but again I don't expect them to be spending big or buying a lot of players, more accurately. They shouldn't have any financial problems within this period, given that they're starting at such a low wage point. Southampton 2019 revenue 150 million, wages 115 million. Obviously there is a little bit of a surplus there of about 35 million. They also had a net spend of 35 million on players. That obviously brings them up to the total revenue. Had match day income of 17 million, broadcasting revenue of 113 million, and commercial revenue of 18 billion with another 1.4 million other. Obviously the match day revenue will be 0 like everyone else. Commercial may be reduced, I'd say 50%. So they're going to be close. Effectively all of their broadcasting revenue is probably going to go on wages. Obviously that's dependent on whether there's any players released or coming to the end of contract, or even whether they sell some players in the summer. They've got a net cash situation of 15 million, so they have got a little bit of a buffer zone there. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't keep hold of it. Again, I think this is a club that's probably looking at sales before purchases, so I don't really expect much activity from Southampton. Tottenham Hotspur's 2019 results. We've got revenue of 461 million, wages of 179, so almost 300 million in surplus revenue. Net income of 4.8 million from 1 player sold. Match day income of 82 million, broadcasting income of 244 million, and commercial income of 135 million. Obviously this was a Champions League final team, and that's going to have boosted the broadcasting income. This year they're going to have Europa League, so that should be reduced down considerably, but I think they should still stay within their wage limitation. Obviously no match day income, that's going to hit them quite badly, and I think Daniel Levy will have his eye on the debt situation. Obviously they built up a lot of debt from building a new stadium, so I think you'll probably have a conservative transfer window from Mr. Levy, depending on the situation now. Obviously a lot's changed since then. Eriksen's left and a few others have come in. They may well have money to spend. It's just a question of whether Mr. Levy wants to take the risk, especially with his considerable debt. It will be interesting to see what he does. He could go overway. He could see that there's bargains to be had and decide to effectively expand the team a bit, or he may decide, no, I'd rather keep a buffer, make sure I can pay the debt, and keep Tottenham ticking over. Either way, I think Tottenham will have a reasonable season. West Brom's 2019 financial results. We've got revenue of 71 million, Wages of 47 million, so a good gap there of about 25, 26 million. Player sales brought in a net income of 10 million. The breakdown of the finances is match day 7.3 million, broadcasting 53 million, which includes parachute payments, and commercial 11 million. No net debt, in fact a net surplus of 1.3 million, so financially stable. Obviously this included parachute payments from the Premier League. They have of course also been promoted to the Premier League, so they have nothing to worry about and will be spending in the transfer window, I presume. That said, they've never had owners who heavily spend in the transfer window. It used to be that they'd spend a little bit of money on a couple of players before the season tickets, and then when the season tickets were in, they just didn't spend anything. So yep, I'd expect them to continue to financially survive. I expect them to add to their squad. It's going to be interesting because they have got relatively new owners. I think this is the first time the owner's been in the premiership, so should be interesting to see what they do. It might be slightly different than what went before. But yep, expecting West Brom to come up. Even if they go down, given the turmoil in the championship, I suspect they'll just be boinging back up. So yep, they'll be fine. West Ham United's 2019 results. We've got revenue of 191 million with wages of 136, so effectively a 60 million buffer. Just checking the match day income, we've got 27 million there, broadcasting income 127 million and commercial 36. So they have, broadcasting is 127 million, so there is a slight deficit there if they were to lose all their match day and commercial income. Hopefully, as I've said with other teams, it'd only be a 50% hit on commercial. Hard to say at this point. They should be able to survive, but again, they're not in a position to spend without sales. Obviously, again, this is 2019, so things changed in 2020. That will be reflected. But I think as a basis, they're probably not going to have the money to spend. They've got debt. Isn't terrible debt, but they've got debt, so that might be a slight concern. I don't really see West Ham selling. I don't really see West Ham buying. I think this can be quite a conservative window for them. That said, they'll probably go out and buy someone the minute I've said this, so you never know. But I think again, West Ham, I don't see them making radical changes here, not unless they sell someone who they feel, or that raises money, considerable money. I mean, if they'd sell Declan Rice, that could generate a considerable amount of money, but even if they did, I don't know if they'd replace him straight away, or whether they'd look to fix up the squad a bit. Hard to say. But I think, again, they're a club that there's going to be treading water, effectively. I don't see any major change without sales. Wolverhampton Wanderers 2019 finances. We've got revenue of 173 million, wages of 92. We've got revenue breakdown of 12 million from match day, 133 million broadcasting, and 26 million commercial, as well as 2 million other. Clearly, just from the broadcasting, they've got enough to cover their wages. That is, of course, not taking into account their European income from this season, which they're still in the Europa League. So they could go ahead and even win that. Seems far-fetched, but strange things have happened. So, yep, that should be a higher figure for this year. Obviously, they are dependent on winning the Europa League to get a place in Europe. So they could still be in Europe, but they are going to have to, I believe they're going to have to win. They have got net debt of 131 million with 28 cash, so again, relatively high net debt, but with enough space for them to manoeuvre. Obviously these are the 2019 figures, so We haven't got the wage figures for any purchases made since, or any sales made, although I don't remember them having any big sales. I think they're going to be able to buy one or two players quite easily. Question is whether they want to, or whether they'll have to move players on, or the people will come in and buy players of theirs. I think most likely there are not going to be many sales from Wolves, and possibly one or two coming in. It does depend on what their current financial situation is and their ability to qualify for Europe. But if they qualify for Europe, it wouldn't be beyond the realms for them to have a couple of players. If they don't, they may decide to be a bit more conservative and push on in the Premier League and try and get that European space back.